Stand up, now. You're trespassing on private property.
Officer, lower your voice. I own this building. The deed is in that briefcase.
Yeah? And I own the ocean. Turn around.
You're making a very expensive mistake.
Hands behind your back.
I am complying. I am not resisting.
Officer Derek Vance had been wearing the badge of the Fort Lauderdale Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and bleed the city's budget of $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, possessing the kind of unearned confidence that often masquerades as authority, and he operated under the dangerous delusion that his instinct was a substitute for the law. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and humid, the kind of Florida day that feels heavy with heat before noon. He received a dispatch call regarding a trespassing suspect at the Accuses, a luxury mid-rise apartment complex known for its exclusive clientele and strict security. The suspect was described as a black male belligerent, refusing to leave the pool area. What Vance found when he arrived was not a belligerent intruder. It was Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old real estate developer and philanthropist, sitting quietly on a chaise lounge reviewing a stack of documents with a glass of iced tea. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's calm explanation, disregarding the legal paperwork, sitting inches away, and dragging a prominent businessman out of his own property in handcuffs, would become a case study in how implicit bias can dismantle a police force's reputation overnight. Before we dive into the details, where are you tuning in from? If you value truth and accountability, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. These stories are necessary, and your support helps us keep the lights on. The Accuses sits on a prime stretch of Los Olas Boulevard. It is the sort of building where the lobby smells of white tea and fig, where the floors are marble, and where the rent for a one-bedroom unit starts at a price that would cover a mortgage in most other states. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was high, reflecting off the pristine blue water of the complex's private pool. The area was mostly empty, save for the rhythmic hum of the filtration system and the rustle of palm fronds in the gentle breeze. Marcus Thorne had spent the last 30 years of his life building an empire from the ground up. He started in construction, framing houses in the sweltering Georgia heat before moving into commercial real estate. He was a man who understood the value of labor and the precise weight of ownership. At 54, he carried himself with the quiet, unshakable gravity of a man who had nothing left to prove. He was dressed in a linen shirt, cream-colored shorts, and leather loafers. Expensive, but understated. He didn't wear flashy jewelry. His authority was in his posture. Thorne wasn't just a tenant at the Accuses. 2 hours earlier, at 8:00 a.m., he had sat in a law office downtown and signed the final acquisition papers. Through his holding company, Thorne Enterprises, he had purchased the entire building for $42 million. He was the owner, the landlord, the boss. He had decided to stop by the property to inspect the amenities before meeting with the management team at noon. He unlocked the gate using the master code provided by the closing attorney, set his leather briefcase on a table, and sat down to enjoy the view of his new investment. He hadn't spoken to a soul. He was simply existing in a space he owned. But for one resident, Marcus Thorne's existence was an offense that required immediate law enforcement intervention. Julianne Moore was 36 years old and had lived in the Accuses for 3 years. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a white Range Rover, and served as the unofficial self-appointed monitor of the building's aesthetic and security. She was the type of tenant who sent emails to management about the color of the lobby flowers or the delivery drivers parking 2 inches over the line. She prided herself on keeping the standards high and keeping the riffraff out. To Julianne, safety was synonymous with exclusivity, and exclusivity looked a very specific way. That Tuesday morning, Julianne was on her balcony 4th floor overlooking the pool. She was drinking her second espresso when she spotted movement below. She frowned. The pool was usually empty at this hour. The professionals were at work, and the retirees usually waited until the afternoon. She leaned over the railing, squinting behind her oversized sunglasses. She saw a black man sitting at the best table, the one under the cabana. He had a briefcase. He looked too comfortable. In Julianne's mind, the calculus was instant and flawed. She didn't recognize him. He didn't look like the tech bros or the retired doctors who usually populated the building. Therefore, he didn't belong. He must have slipped in behind a resident or jumped the back fence. He was likely from the older complex 3 blocks over, looking for a nicer place to hang out. She watched him for 5 minutes. Thorne did nothing but read papers and sip his tea. But to Julianne, his silence was casing the joint, and his presence was an active threat. She grabbed her phone and marched down to the pool deck, determined to confront him. She burst through the gate, her heels clicking sharply on the pavers. Thorne looked up, lowering his reading glasses, offering a polite nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "Do you live here?" Julianne didn't return the greeting. She stood with her hands on her hips, blocking the sun. Thorne paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm taking care of some business here, yes." "That's not what I asked," Julianne snapped. "I asked if you live here. I know every resident in this building and I've never seen you before. We have a strict policy about guests. You need a resident with you." "I'm not a guest, ma'am," Thorne said, turning a page in his document. "And I don't need a chaperone. If you'll excuse me, I'm reading." "You're trespassing." Julianne's voice rose an octave. "I watched you. You don't have a key fob. You just walked in. This is private property." "I entered with a code," Thorne corrected gently. "Please, I'd prefer not to be disturbed." The dismissal infuriated her. Being ignored was to Julianne a form of violence. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. You need to leave now, or you're going to be arrested." "You do what you feel is necessary," Thorne said, returning his attention to the structural inspection report in his hand. He didn't pack up. He didn't run. He stayed seated. Julianne dialed 911, her hands shaking with adrenaline. 911, what is your emergency?" "I'm at the Axton Apartments on Las Olas. There is a man trespassing at the pool. He's aggressive. I asked him to leave and he refused. I don't feel safe. He's lurking. You need to send someone right now." Officer Derek Vance heard the call and felt a familiar surge of anticipation. Trespassing. Aggressive male. Refusing to leave. It was a simple narrative, one he understood. In his 6 years on the force, Vance had built a reputation that should have triggered an internal affairs review years ago. He had 14 complaints in his file. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct, euphemisms for a temper that flared whenever his authority was questioned, particularly by citizens who didn't look like him. His supervisors knew he was a problem. His sergeant had written 2 separate memos regarding Vance's need for de-escalation training, but in a department stretched thin with a union that fought every disciplinary action, Vance remained on the street. He was considered proactive, a cop who got numbers even if his methods were crude. He viewed his patrol zone not as a community to serve, but as a territory to conquer. When the dispatcher relayed the details, complainant states subject is a black male approximately 50s refusing to vacate private property. Vance's mind filled in the blanks. He pictured a vagrant. He pictured someone drunk or high causing a scene in a high-end neighborhood. He didn't picture a man like Marcus Thorne. "I'm en route," Vance radioed, hitting the accelerator. "ETA 2 minutes. He arrived at the Axton at 10:28 a.m. He didn't park in a visitor spot. He pulled his cruiser up onto the curb, blocking the main walkway, lights flashing blue and red against the palm trees. It was a show of force before he even opened the door. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and sunglasses that hid his eyes. He walked with a heavy stomping gait. Julianne was waiting at the gate, looking vindicated. "Officer over here, he's still there. He's just sitting there like he owns the place." Vance nodded to her barely breaking stride. "Stay back, ma'am. I'll handle it." He looked through the iron bars of the fence. He saw Thorne sitting at the table legs crossed reading. It was a peaceful scene, completely at odds with the aggressive call notes. A seasoned officer might have paused, assessed the body language, and approached with a conversation. Vance saw defiance. He saw a man who hadn't run away when the police arrived, which, in Vance's twisted logic, meant the man was challenging him. Vance pushed the gate open. It was locked. He rattled it violently. Thorne looked up, saw the officer, and calmly reached over to the keypad on the wall. He punched in a 6-digit code. The gate clicked and swung open. A normal reaction would be to ask, "How do you have the code?" Vance didn't ask. He interpreted it as the suspect knowing a stolen code. He marched onto the pool deck, his voice booming across the water. "Police! Stand up, get your hands out of your pockets!" Marcus Thorne did not stand up immediately. He closed the file folder he was reading and placed it gently on the table. He took a sip of his iced tea, then set the glass down. He turned his body slightly toward Officer Vance, keeping his hands visible on the armrests of the chair. "Good morning, officer," Thorne said. His voice was level void of fear. This composure irritated Vance more than shouting would have. "I said stand up!" Vance barked, closing the distance between them. He stopped 5 feet away, towering over the seated man. "We have a report of trespassing. You need to identify yourself and explain why you're on this property." "I am not trespassing," Thorne said, remaining seated. "I am the property owner. If you'll lower your voice, I can show you the documentation." Vance let out a short, derisive laugh. "The property owner?" "Yeah, right. And I'm the mayor. Stand up, turn around. You're done here." "Officer," Thorne said, his tone hardening slightly, gaining the steel edge of a man used to boardrooms and negotiations. "My name is Marcus Thorne. The paperwork for the purchase of this building, finalized at 8:00 a.m. this morning, is in that briefcase. I strongly suggest you look at it before you take this any further." "I'm not looking at your fake papers," Vance sneered. He wasn't interested in evidence. He was interested in compliance. "Do you have a key fob, a resident ID, something with an address on it?" "I don't need a key fob. I have the master codes, which I just used to let you in." "So you hacked the gate. That's breaking and entering." Vance improvised his logic, spiraling to justify his aggression. "Last chance. ID. Now." "My identification is in my wallet," Thorne said, "which is in my back pocket. I am going to reach for it slowly. Do not shoot me." The statement hung in the air, heavy and dark. It was a reality that Thorne, despite his millions, had to calculate. Vance bristled at the instruction. "Don't tell me what to do. Stand up." Vance grabbed Thorne's upper arm. Thorne's eyes went cold. "Remove your hand." "Stand up!" Vance yanked him. Thorne, realizing that physical resistance would give this officer the excuse he was desperate for, allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. He stood 6'2", eye to eye with Vance. "You are making a mistake," Thorne said. "A very expensive mistake. The only mistake was you thinking you could crash this pool," Vance retorted. He spun Thorne around. "Hands behind your back." Julianne was watching from the gate, recording on her phone. "I told you," she shouted. "I told you he didn't belong here." The metal cuffs clicked shut around Marcus Thorne's wrists. They were tight, pinching the skin. It was a sensation Thorne had never experienced, not in his youth, and certainly not as one of the most respected developers in the state. He felt a flash of humiliation, hot and sharp, but he clamped down on it. He knew that any display of anger would be used against him. He needed to be perfect. He needed to be impeccable. "I am complying," Thorne stated, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. Residents were stepping out onto their balconies now, drawn by the commotion. "I am not resisting. Officer, check the briefcase on the table. The deed is inside." "Forget the briefcase," Vance said, shoving Thorne forward. "We'll sort your property out at the station. Right now you're going for trespassing and resisting an officer." resisting," Thorne repeated calmly. "I haven't moved a muscle." "You failed to obey a lawful order to vacate," Vance recited the rote script of a bad arrest. He marched Thorne toward the gate past the table where the evidence of his innocence lay untouched. "Officer," Thorne said, stopping his feet for a second. Vance shoved him again. "My heart medication is in that bag. And my phone. You need to bring them." Vance hesitated. Denying medication was a liability he understood. He groaned, reached over, and grabbed the leather briefcase. It was heavy. "Move." As they passed Julianne, she smirked. "Thank you, officer. It's just scary, you know, you never know who's watching you." Thorne stopped. He turned his head to look directly at Julianne. "Unit 4, Row 2, he said clearly. Julianne blinked. "What?" "You live in Unit 402. Julianne Moore. Lease expires in November." Julianne's face went slack. How do you know that?" "Keep walking." Vance shoved Thorne through the gate toward the cruiser. "I know it," Thorne called back, his voice projecting smoothly. "Because I just bought your lease." Vance slammed the suspect against the hood of the patrol car. "Shut up. Get inside." He opened the back door and guided Thorne's head down, pushing him into the hard plastic seat. The cage was cramped, smelling of stale sweat and disinfectant. Thorne sat awkwardly, his hands pinned behind him, watching through the wire mesh as Vance tossed the briefcase into the front passenger seat. The neighbors were filming. Thorne looked directly into one of the phone cameras held by a young man in a bathrobe. He nodded once, a gesture of dignity in an undignified situation. Record it all, he thought. Every second adds a 0 to the settlement. The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes. It was a silent ride. Vance was pumping with adrenaline, rehearsing his report in his head. Suspect was uncooperative, refused to identify, claimed ownership of property without proof, hostile demeanor. He felt good. He had protected the community. He had removed the threat. In the back seat, Marcus Thorne was dissecting Derek Vance's life. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating. He was memorizing the badge number reflected in the rearview mirror. He was noting the time. He was thinking about the phone call he would make to his attorney, Alan Dershowitz's former partner, the moment he was allowed. He was thinking about the civil rights violation. False arrest, false imprisonment, kidnapping technically. They arrived at the station. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage door rattling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car. "Let's go. Booking." They walked into the processing area. It was busy. Officers were typing reports. A drunk tank was noisy in the corner. Vance marched Thorne up to the main desk. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Miller. Miller was 58 years old, 30 years on the job. He had 2 months until retirement. He had seen everything. He had a coffee in one hand and a pen in the other. He looked up as Vance approached with his prisoner. Miller's eyes went from Vance to Thorne to the expensive suit to Thorne's face. Miller stopped chewing his gum. He squinted. He recognized the face. He had seen it in the newspaper 3 days ago. Local developer donates $2 million to Boys and Girls Club. Miller stood up slowly. "Vance," he said, his voice low. "Who is this?" "Trespassing suspect," Vance said, puffed up. "Caught him at the Axton. Refused to leave. Claimed he owned the place." Miller looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at Miller. "Sergeant," Thorne said calmly, "my name is Marcus Thorne. I am the owner of Thorne Enterprises. I purchased the Axton Apartments at 8:00 a.m. this morning. The closing documents and the deed are in my briefcase, which Officer Vance has in his possession." He refused to look at them. Miller's face drained of color. He looked at Vance. "You refused to look at his ID. He didn't have ID on him," Vance defended. "He started talking about papers in a bag. It was a stall tactic." Vance, Miller said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Do you know who this is? It's a trespasser. This is Marcus Thorne. He owns half the skyline in downtown. Miller pointed a shaking finger at the briefcase in Vance's hand. Open that bag, now. Sarge, open the bag, Miller roared. The entire booking room went silent. Vance, confused and suddenly feeling the ground shift beneath him, placed the briefcase on the counter. He undid the latches. He opened it. Inside, there was a neat stack of legal documents bound in blue folders. On top was a notarized deed stamped with the county seal dated that morning. Grantee Thorne Enterprises, LLC. Property description. The Axton 1201 Las Olas Bluffed. There was also a set of master keys, and a checkbook, and a cell phone. Miller picked up the deed. He read it. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling deeply, visualizing the mountain of paperwork and the media storm that was about to descend upon his precinct. He looked at Vance. He owns the building, Vance. He bought it this morning. Vance stared at the paper. That could be fake. Anyone can print that. Miller looked at Vance like he was a bug on a windshield. I'm calling the city clerk. Miller made the call on speakerphone. Verify deed transfer. Parcel ID? He waited. The voice on the other end came through clear and crisp. Yes, Sergeant. Transfer recorded at 8:15 a.m. today. Buyer is Marcus Thorne. Is there a problem? No, Miller whispered. Just checking. He hung up. He came around the desk. He didn't ask Vance to do it. Miller pulled a key from his belt and unlocked Thorne's handcuffs himself. The metal clicked open. Thorne rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations. Mr. Thorne, Miller said, I cannot express how sorry I am. This is a severe misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Sergeant, Thorne said, his voice filling the quiet room. It is incompetence. And it is profiling. This officer refused to verify my identity because he had already decided who I was. Vance stood there, mouth slightly open. I was just doing my job. The caller said he was aggressive. I was reading a contract, Thorne said, turning to Vance, and drinking tea. A lieutenant walked in, attracted by the shouting earlier. Miller briefed him in 30 seconds. The lieutenant looked at Vance, then at Thorne. He turned to Vance. Badge and gun, on the desk. You're done for the day. Go home. But, now. Thorne picked up his briefcase. He checked the contents. I want that officer's name, badge number, and the body camera footage preserved immediately. My attorney will be in touch within the hour. You'll have everything, sir, the lieutenant said. We can drive you back to your vehicle. No, Thorne said, straightening his cuffs. I'll take a cab. I don't want to be in a police car ever again. The fallout was swift, public, and brutal. The body camera footage was released within 48 hours, largely because Thorne's legal team filed an emergency injunction to get it. The video showed everything: Thorne's calm demeanor, the polite offer to show papers, and Vance's immediate irrational aggression. It went viral globally. Billionaire arrested for sitting at his own pool. The city of Fort Lauderdale didn't even try to fight the civil rights lawsuit. The optics were indefensible. They settled for $6.5 million to avoid a trial that would have exposed years of ignored complaints against Officer Vance. Derek Vance was fired 3 weeks later. The internal investigation sustained 4 charges: false arrest, failure to investigate excessive force, and conduct unbecoming. His certification was revoked by the state board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in Florida again. At 29, his career in law enforcement was over. But the story didn't end there. 2 months later, Julianne Moore received a letter. It wasn't on police stationery. It was on the heavy, cream-colored letterhead of Thorne Enterprises. She opened it with trembling hands. Dear Ms. Moore, regarding your tenancy at the Axton Unit 402, this letter serves as formal notice that your lease expiring on November 1st will not be renewed. Under the terms of the rental agreement, the management reserves the right to decline renewal without cause. You have 30 days to vacate the premises upon lease expiration. Furthermore, please be advised that Thorne Enterprises has recently acquired the staggering majority of luxury rental properties in the Los Olas district. We have flagged your profile in our tenant database due to a documented history of harassment against other residents and staff. We wish you the best of luck in your search for housing elsewhere. Sincerely, Marcus Thorne, owner. Julianne was effectively blacklisted from the entire neighborhood she had tried so hard to protect. She moved back to Ohio 3 months later. Marcus Thorne used the settlement money to start a legal defense fund for wrongful arrest victims who didn't have his resources. He still owns the Axton. He goes to the pool every Tuesday morning. He reads his paper. He drinks his tea. And nobody disturbs him. This story isn't just about a bad cop or a nosy neighbor. It's about the terrifying fragility of freedom. Marcus Thorne had the suit, the vocabulary, the demeanor, and the deed to the building, and it still wasn't enough to stop him from being put in chains. It proves that for some, the presumption of guilt is the default setting. If a man who owns the building can be dragged out in handcuffs, what happens to the man who just rents? What happens to the man who is just delivering a package? We have to ask ourselves, why is comfort often weaponized? Why do we accept a system where a phone call based on bias carries more weight than the truth sitting in a briefcase? What do you think, should 911 callers like Julianne face legal penalties for making false reports based on bias? And should police officers be personally liable for civil rights violations? Or should the taxpayers keep footing the bill? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. Awareness is the first step toward change. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and stay watching.
Step away from the bin. You're being detained for illegal dumping.
This is my driveway. That's my bin. You have zero legal basis to stop me.
You don't belong here. ID, now.
I'm a municipal court judge. You are violating my...
Officer Kyle Reed had been patrolling the quiet streets of Oak Creek for less than 4 years when he made the decision that would implode his life, strip him of his badge, and force the municipality to write a check for $3.4 million. He was 28 years old, a man who carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed the badge on his chest granted him immunity from consequence. He was aggressive, ambitious, and fundamentally unable to distinguish between a criminal threat and a citizen living their life. On a bright Tuesday morning, under the clear blue sky of an affluent suburb, Reed received a dispatch call regarding a disturbance involving refuse disposal. It was the kind of low-priority call that seasoned officers handle with a drive-by and a wave. But for Officer Reed, it was an opportunity to exert control. The target of his aggression was not a vagrant nor a trespasser. She was the Honorable Evelyn Vance, a 58-year-old municipal court judge who had presided over the city's bench for 2 decades. What Reed did next, ignoring her property rights, mocking her explanation, and arresting her on her own driveway, would become a harrowing case study in how unchecked arrogance and implicit bias can dismantle the very concept of justice. Before we get into the details, where are you tuning in from? If you believe in accountability for those in power, please hit that subscribe button. We need your help to keep telling these stories. Oak Creek is the sort of neighborhood where the lawns are manicured to military precision and the silence is heavy with wealth. It is a place of winding cul-de-sacs, 3-car garages, and residents who value privacy above all else. At 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the neighborhood was mostly empty, save for the landscaping crews and the occasional delivery truck. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. In the driveway of the largest colonial-style home on Elmwood Circle, Evelyn Vance was taking a rare morning off. Judge Vance was a woman of formidable intellect and ironclad reputation. She had spent 20 years on the bench, known for her piercing gaze and her encyclopedic knowledge of municipal and state law. Before that, she had been a fierce defense attorney who specialized in civil rights litigation. She was a pillar of the legal community, a woman who had sworn in the very police chief who now oversaw the department. But on this particular Tuesday, she didn't look like Your Honor. She looked like a homeowner tending to her sanctuary. She was dressed in worn denim overalls, a faded sun hat, and thick gardening gloves. She was dragging a heavy recycling bin from her garage to the curb, preparing for the late morning pickup. Evelyn had lived in Oak Creek for 12 years. She was one of the few black residents in the subdivision, a fact that she rarely dwelt upon, but was never allowed to entirely forget. She kept to herself, waved to neighbors, and paid her exorbitant property taxes on time. She assumed she was just another neighbor. But for Brenda Miller, who lived 2 houses down, Evelyn was a perpetual question mark. Brenda Miller was 46 years old, a woman with too much time and an overactive imagination fueled by neighborhood watch apps. She spent her mornings peering through her blinds, monitoring the street for anything she deemed out of character. When she saw a black woman in work clothes dragging a bin down the driveway of the Vance residence, her mind didn't register neighbor doing chores. It registered unauthorized worker dumping trash. Brenda had convinced herself that people from bad neighborhoods were driving into Oak Creek to illegally dump their garbage in the residents' bins to avoid fees. It was a ludicrous theory, but to Brenda it was fact. She watched Evelyn for 5 minutes. She didn't recognize the clothes. She didn't recognize the hat. She certainly didn't care to verify who it was. She simply picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, her voice trembling with self-righteous indignation. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious individual on Elmwood Circle," Brenda said, peeking through the slats of her blinds. "There's a woman, she doesn't live here, and she's dumping trash in the bins at 420 Elmwood. She looks like she's looking for things to steal, too. She's been loitering in the driveway." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "Is she threatening anyone? Is there a weapon?" "No weapons," Brenda replied. "But she's aggressive. She's throwing things around. I think she might be scrapping for metal. You need to send someone before she breaks into the garage." The call was coded as a suspicious person. Potential illegal dumping. It was routed to the nearest patrol unit. That unit belonged to Officer Kyle Reed. Officer Kyle Reed was 3 miles away, idling in a church parking lot and scrolling through his phone when the call came in. He read the notes on his terminal. Suspicious female, possible illegal dumping, looking into garages, subject is African American wearing work clothes. Reed's internal bias immediately began to paint a picture. In his 4 years on the force, he had developed a reputation for being proactive, a euphemism his sergeant used in performance reviews to describe Reed's tendency to escalate minor infractions into major confrontations. Reed viewed the affluent sectors of the city as zones that needed protection from outsiders. If someone was dumping trash in Oak Creek, they were clearly an intruder. They were disrespecting the order of things. He flipped on his lights, not the siren, and sped toward Elmwood Circle. He arrived at 10:27 a.m., pulling his cruiser up to the curb with a sharp screech of tires that was entirely unnecessary for a trash complaint. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his belt, his hand hovering near his holster, a habit he had never broken. He saw the suspect immediately. Evelyn Vance was standing by the curb, brushing dirt off her gloves. She had successfully moved the heavy blue bin and was inspecting a cracked wheel. She didn't look up immediately. She was focused on the plastic caster. Reed walked up the driveway, chest puffed out, sunglasses on despite the fact that he was stepping into the shade of a large oak tree. He didn't see a 58-year-old woman gardening. He saw a suspect. He saw someone who didn't belong. "Hey!" Reed shouted from 30 feet away. "Step away from the bin!" Evelyn froze. She straightened her back slowly, pulling off one glove. She squinted at the officer approaching her. She had been lost in thought, contemplating a complex zoning case she was due to hear on Thursday. The sudden shout jarred her. Excuse me? Evelyn asked, her voice calm, the deep, resonant contralto that had commanded courtrooms for decades. I said step away from the bin, Reed barked, closing the distance. Put the bag down. We've got reports of illegal dumping. Evelyn looked at the bin, then back at the officer. A small, incredulous smile touched her lips. Officer, I am not dumping anything. I am putting out my recycling. The truck missed me last week. This is private property, Reed said, stopping 5 feet from her. He looked her up and down, sneering at the dirty denim overalls. You can't just drive your trash into this neighborhood and dump it in other people's bins. That's theft of services. Drive my trash. Evelyn laughed, a dry, sharp sound. Officer, look at me. I didn't drive here. I walked out of my front door. This is my house. This is my bin. Reed shook his head, dismissing her words before they even fully registered. Yeah, I've heard that one before. It's my cousin's house. I'm watching it for a friend. Look, lady, we have a witness who saw you walking up and prowling around the garage. Let's see some ID. Evelyn sighed. She knew this dance. She had seen the body cam footage of 100 similar stops in her courtroom. She knew that as a black woman in America, her ownership of $1 million home was always treated as a hypothesis to be tested, not a fact to be accepted. Officer, she said, her tone shifting from casual to professional. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am the homeowner of this property at 420 Elmwood Circle. I am gardening on my day off. I do not have my identification on my person because I am standing in my own driveway. So you have no ID, Reed said, latching onto the refusal. You're refusing to identify yourself. I am not refusing, Evelyn corrected him, her patience thinning. I am stating that I do not carry a purse while I mulch my hydrangeas. If you want to verify my residence, you can run the license plate of the Mercedes in the garage. It is registered to me. I'm not running plates, Reed snapped. I'm conducting an investigation into illegal dumping and trespassing. If you can't prove you live here, then as far as I'm concerned, you're trespassing. Now, for the last time, do you have ID or not? The air on Elmwood Circle seemed to grow thinner, charged with the static of imminent conflict. Judge Vance looked at Officer Reed, really looked at him, and saw the danger in his eyes. It was the glazed look of a man who had stopped listening, a man running on a script of authority that he didn't actually understand. My identification is inside the house, Evelyn said slowly, pointing toward the large oak double doors of the entrance. I am going to walk inside, retrieve my driver's license, and bring it out to you. That will resolve this misunderstanding. She turned to walk toward her front door. It was a reasonable action. It was the action of a homeowner complying with a request. But to Officer Reed, it was an act of defiance. Hey, stay right there, Reed shouted, moving quickly to cut her off. He stepped between her and the path to the house, his hand dropping to rest on his taser. I didn't say you could leave. You're detained. Evelyn stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a rising cold fury. She was a judge. She knew the Fourth Amendment better than this officer knew his own badge number. Officer, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that made defense attorneys stutter. You are making a grave mistake. You have no reasonable suspicion to detain me. I have identified myself verbally. I am on the curtilage of my own home. You are preventing a citizen from entering their own residence without a warrant or probable cause. I strongly suggest you step aside. Reed laughed. It was a nervous, arrogant sound. Oh, we got a lawyer here. You think using big words is going to scare me? You're detained because you match the description of a suspect involved in illegal dumping. You're not going anywhere until I say so. The description, Evelyn challenged. A black woman in a driveway. That is not a description of a crime officer. That is a description of demographic bias. Stop with the attitude, Reed warned, stepping closer, invading her personal space. You're making this worse for yourself. You're agitated, you're refusing commands, and you're trying to flee the scene. Flee the scene. Evelyn gestured to her house. To my kitchen. Do you hear yourself? By now, the commotion had drawn attention. Across the street, Mr. Henderson, a retired surgeon, had come out to retrieve his mail. He stopped watching the scene unfold. 2 houses down, the curtain twitched where Brenda Miller was watching, but she didn't come out. However, a younger couple walking their dog had stopped on the sidewalk. They were filming. Officer, look around you, Evelyn said, gesturing to the neighbors. People are watching. You are harassing a homeowner. I am asking you one last time to allow me to retrieve my identification so you can go about your day. And I'm telling you, you're not going into that house, Reed said. For all I know, you're going in there to grab a weapon. Or maybe you're going to lock the door and barricade yourself because you know you don't belong here. Evelyn took a deep breath. She knew she had to be careful. One sudden move and this man could hurt her. He was young, pumped full of adrenaline, and clearly not processing reality. I'm going to reach into my pocket, Evelyn narrated calmly, and I'm going to take out my phone. I am going to call your supervisor. You're not calling anyone, Reed said. Put your hands where I can see them. My hands are right here, Evelyn said, holding them up, palms open, dirt-stained. Officer, listen to me very carefully. I am a municipal court judge for this city. I sit in Department 4. I sign the warrants you execute. If you continue this course of action, you will be ending your career. The words hung in the air. I am a municipal court judge. For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed Officer Reed's face, but his ego was a fortress built to withstand logic and reason. He looked at the woman in the dirty overalls, the sweat on her brow, the old gardening gloves. His brain rejected the information. Judges didn't look like this. Judges wore robes. Judges were old white men or polished women in suits. This woman was just trying to bluff him. Yeah, right. Reed scoffed, his confidence returning with a vengeance. And I'm the mayor. You think you can lie to the police? Impersonating a public official is another charge I can tack on. You just dug your hole deeper, lady. It is not a lie, Evelyn said, her voice steady. It is a verifiable fact. Call your dispatch. Ask them to run the name Evelyn Vance. I'm done playing games, Reed snapped. I gave you a chance. You want to be difficult, fine. Turn around. I am not turning around, Evelyn said, standing her ground. I have committed no crime. The neighbors were shouting now. Mr. Henderson, the surgeon across the street, yelled out, Officer, that's Judge Vance. You're making a mistake. Reed ignored him. He saw only the defiance in front of him. He reached out and grabbed Evelyn's left wrist. Don't touch me. Evelyn recoiled, pulling her arm back. Stop resisting. Reed shouted the magic words that justified everything in his mind. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm again, this time twisting it violently behind her back. Evelyn gasped in pain. She was 58 years old. Her joints were not what they used to be. The torque on her shoulder was excruciating. You are hurting me. I am not resisting. Hands behind your back. Reed didn't care. He spun her around, shoving her chest first against the side of his patrol car. The hot metal burned against her cheek. He grabbed her other arm and wrenched it back. The click of the handcuffs was loud in the quiet morning air. You are under arrest, Reed panted, securing the cuffs too tight. For trespassing, obstruction of justice, and resisting arrest. You remain silent, Evelyn whispered, her face pressed against the car, tears of pain and humiliation stinging her eyes. You have the right to remain silent. Oh, I know the rights. Reed mocked her, leaning close to her ear. I read them to criminals like you every day. I am advising you to remain silent, Evelyn said, her voice turning into steel, because every word you speak from this moment forward will be used against you in a civil deposition. Reed paused, confused by her tone, but he shook it off. He patted her down, his hands rough and intrusive over her work clothes. He found nothing but a packet of sunflower seeds in her pocket. No weapon, no drugs, just seeds. He opened the back door of the cruiser. Get in. Evelyn maneuvered herself into the cramped plastic seat. The hard shell dug into her spine. Her shoulders screamed in protest. She watched through the plexiglass as Reed walked around to the driver's side. She saw her neighbors standing on the sidewalk, phones, raised faces, masked in horror. Mr. Henderson was on his phone, likely calling the chief of police directly. Reed got into the driver's seat, slamming the door. The interior of the car smelled of stale coffee and sanitizer. He adjusted his rearview mirror to look at her. "Comfortable, Your Honor?" he asked, the sarcasm dripping from his lips. Evelyn met his eyes in the mirror. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She simply stared at him with the terrifying calm of a woman who knows exactly how the end of the world looks and knows she is the one bringing it. "Drive, officer," she said. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Officer Reed spent the time radioing ahead, boasting to the dispatch that he had a non-compliant female in custody who was claiming to be a judge. He laughed about it, making jokes about how everyone he arrested was always someone important. In the back seat, Evelyn Vance was building a case. She was memorizing the timestamps. She was noting the speed he was driving, 45 in a 35 zone. She was cataloging his failure to seatbelt her properly. She was replaying his exact words, analyzing them for Fourth Amendment violations, for bias, for procedural errors. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a grand jury of one. They pulled into the precinct sally port. The heavy garage doors rolled down, shutting out the sunlight. Reed hauled her out of the car. Her legs were stiff, her shoulder throbbing. He marched her through the booking doors, gripping her arm like a trophy. The precinct was busy. Officers were typing reports. Phones were ringing. Reed walked her up to the main desk. Sergeant Tom Miller was on duty. He was a 30-year veteran, a man with gray hair and a tired demeanor. He had seen everything. He was typing an email when Reed walked up. "Got a live one, Sarge," Reed announced, pushing Evelyn forward. "Trespassing, obstruction, resisting. Refused to ID, then claimed she was a judge. Can you believe the nerve?" Sergeant Miller didn't look up immediately. "Put her in holding cell 2, Reed. I'll start the paperwork." "She's still claiming it," Reed chuckled. "Hey, lady, tell the sergeant who you are." Evelyn stood tall despite the handcuffs, despite the dirt on her face, despite the humiliation. She looked at the top of Sergeant Miller's head. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. Sergeant Miller froze. His fingers stopped typing. That voice. He knew that voice. He had heard that voice give jury instructions. He had heard that voice scold prosecutors for sloppy filings. He had stood in front of the bench and sworn oaths to that voice. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Sergeant Miller looked up. His eyes widened. His jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. He looked at the woman in the dirty overalls, then at the handcuffs, then at Officer Reed, who was still grinning. "Oh my God," Miller whispered. He scrambled up from his chair, knocking it over. "Judge Vance." Reed's smile faltered. "Wait, what?" Miller didn't answer him. He ran around the desk, his keys jingling frantically in his hand. "Judge Vance, I don't—" "What is happening here? Why are you in cuffs?" "Ask Officer Reed." Evelyn said, her voice cool and detached. "He seemed very sure of his legal standing." Miller turned to Reed. The look on the sergeant's face was not anger. It was horror. It was the look of a man watching a train derail in slow motion. "Reed." Miller's voice shook. "Do you know who this is?" She said she was a judge." Reed stammered, the first crack of fear appearing in his demeanor. "But she didn't have ID. She was digging in the trash." "Uncuff her!" Miller roared. "Uncuff her right now!" Reed fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. The reality was crashing down on him. The puzzle pieces, the house, the confidence, the legal knowledge were slamming together into a picture of absolute disaster. He unlocked the cuffs. Evelyn rubbed her wrists. There were deep red welts where the metal had bitten into her skin. "I am so sorry, Your Honor." Miller was practically bowing. "I had no idea. If I had known—" "You didn't know because your officer didn't check," Evelyn said. "He assumed, he profiled, and he arrested. I was just following protocol." Reed whispered, his voice small. Evelyn turned to him. The precinct had gone silent. Every officer in the room had stopped what they were doing. They were watching the death of a career. "Protocol?" Evelyn asked. "Which protocol requires you to twist the arms of a 58-year-old woman for gardening? Which protocol allows you to ignore a claim of identity without verification? Which protocol teaches you that a black woman in a nice house must be a criminal?" The doors to the inner office burst open. Captain Reynolds, the station commander, strode out. He had evidently received a phone call, likely from Mr. Henderson or the chief himself. He took one look at the scene. Judge Vance rubbing her wrists. Sergeant Miller, pale as a ghost. Officer Reed looking like he wanted to vomit, and he knew it was worse than he had heard. "Judge Vance," Captain Reynolds said, rushing forward. "Please come into my office. Let's get you some water. Let's sit down." "I will not sit down, Captain," Evelyn said. She stood in the middle of the booking room, dirt on her overalls, dignity wrapped around her like a cloak. "And I do not want water. I want this officer's badge." Reynolds looked at Reed. There was no defense to be made. "Reed, conference room. Now." "But, sir, she refused." Reed started a last-ditch effort to salvage his reality. "Shut your mouth," Reynolds said, his voice low and dangerous. "Go to the conference room." Reed walked away, his head down the eyes of every fellow officer burning into his back. They knew. They all knew. He was a dead man walking. Evelyn turned back to the captain. "I want the body camera footage secured immediately. I want the dispatch logs preserved. And I want a medical photographer to document these injuries on my wrists before I leave this building." "Of course, Your Honor," Reynolds said. "Whatever you need. We can drive you home. We can—" "I will call my husband to pick me up," Evelyn said. "I do not wish to be in a police vehicle ever again." She took out her phone, which had been returned to her by a trembling rookie officer. She dialed a number. "Charles?" she said when her husband answered. "Yes, I'm at the precinct." "No, I'm fine. I've been arrested. Yes, by a child with a badge. Please come get me. And call our lawyer. Not the criminal one. The civil rights one." The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Officer Reed was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. The body camera footage was reviewed by the chief, the mayor, and the city attorney within 24 hours. It was indefensible. The footage showed everything: Evelyn's calmness, Reed's aggression, the clear identification of her status, and Reed's sarcastic dismissal. It showed him escalating a trash complaint into a violent arrest within 3 minutes. During his disciplinary hearing, Reed tried to argue that he was in fear for his safety because Evelyn had moved toward the house. She was walking to get her ID, the internal affairs investigator noted dryly. She is a grandmother. She was holding gardening gloves. You were terrified of a grandmother. Reed had no answer. The termination letter was issued 2 weeks later. Kyle Reed was fired for conduct unbecoming an officer, excessive use of force, unlawful arrest, and failure to follow procedure. But the city wasn't done. Judge Vance filed a federal lawsuit. She didn't just sue for the arrest. She sued for the violation of her civil rights, for the pain and suffering, and for the systemic failure of the department to train its officers to recognize their own biases. The city settled. They didn't want this going to a jury. They didn't want Judge Vance testifying against them in open court. The settlement was $3.4 million. Officer Reed was decertified. His name was added to the state database of officers ineligible for rehire, At 28, his career in law enforcement was over. He ended up moving 2 states away, working in a warehouse, forever the guy who arrested a judge because he couldn't believe a black woman lived in a mansion. As for Brenda Miller, the neighbor who made the call, the recording of her 911 call was released as part of the public records request. The neighborhood heard it. They heard the bias in her voice. They heard her call Judge Vance a suspicious scavenger. Oak Creek is a polite neighborhood. They didn't burn crosses on her lawn. They simply iced her out. The invitations to the block parties stopped. The waves at the mailbox ceased. The polite nods at the grocery store vanished. Brenda lived in a prison of silence of her own making, surrounded by neighbors who knew exactly who she was. 6 months later, Judge Vance was back in her garden. The hydrangeas were blooming. The sun was shining. She wore the same denim overalls. A police cruiser drove slowly down the street. The officer inside slowed down as he passed the Vance residence. He looked at the woman in the garden. He waved respectfully. Judge Vance didn't wave back. She simply watched him until he was gone, then returned to her work. The bruises on her wrists had healed, but the memory of the cold metal remained. It was a reminder that no amount of education, no amount of money, and no amount of authority can fully shield you from the assumptions of others. It was a reminder that justice is not a given. It is something you have to fight for every single day. Why do we keep seeing stories like this? Why is suspicious so often a synonym for different? And what would you have done if you were the neighbor watching from the window? If this story moved you, if it made you angry, or if it made you think, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Because the only way we change the narrative is by refusing to stay silent. Thank you for watching and stay safe out there.